Let's welcome Mr. PJ for his talk on urban legends. What you code makes you who you are.
All right, thank you. So as Mustafa said, I'm PJ, and I've done this talk a couple of times, and it was originally called Urban Legends, What You Code Makes You Who You Are. And over the past year or so, there's been a lot of depressing things that have come out about different languages. So this is the alternate title, Everything is Dead, so why do we even bother? Testing's dead, Rails is dead, PHP's dead, everything's dead. Why do we even bother? Real quick, I work at IBM Bluemix, which is a pretty cool company. We're a cloud platform. We do both sides of the firewall, so private, public, hybrid, whatever. Web and mobile solutions, we're really big into IoT. But I'm not here to talk about that. I'm here to talk about my favorite subject, which is me. So a little about me. So I am a developer evangelist. For those of you who don't know what that means I go to lots of conferences and lots of meetups and lots of hackathons, and I get to have lots of fun. Also, I've been to lots of airports and lots of hotels, and that's not always as fun. But beyond being a coder who gets to travel a lot and meet people and make friends, I'm a hockey coach. I play in a band. I occasionally let my children keynote major programming conferences. It's a little weird. If I can ever give you a suggestion, don't bring an 11-year-old up on stage with you when you're keynoting RubyConf. Just a tip. I love karaoke. I am a co-core member of Ruby Karaoke. I helped with Davey, who's also here, to create PHP Karaoke. And the one thing I've noticed is it seems like the Python community doesn't have Python karaoke, so maybe we could work on that. We'll talk about that later. Also, I run an organization called Prompt. How many of you saw my lightning talk yesterday? Okay, so help me get the conversation started. Get a hold of us at mhprompt.org, and we'd be happy to have you. So enough about me and what I do. What is this talk about? So there's kind of three parts to this talk. Three very distinct and different parts. The first is that there's major misconceptions around the languages we use. And these languages have different, aspects of why they have these different perceptions, and it's kind of weird. And especially when you're in a language, most of you are Python developers, and so you think, well, Python's great and it can do all this stuff, and you don't really see what that outside perception is. And it's kind of interesting to take a look at that and figure out why that may not be right and why we need to get the word out. The other thing is about the communities we identify with. So, this is a Python community conference. And how does that work, and how do we interact with other communities? And final is the big thing, the difference between being open source and being enterprise. And so these are kind of the three main concepts I'm going to work on, and we'll see if we get there. What this talk isn't about is actual urban legends. We are not going to talk about the Loch Ness Monster. So if you're coming here thinking that was going to happen, I'm sorry. None of these things, alligators in the sewer, none of these things are like real urban legends. So let's get into what we're really going to talk about. We'll start with Ruby. How many of you have done Ruby before? Or currently do Ruby? I'm a Ruby developer mostly. And it's interesting because when I first started, the first comment I got was like, why would you do that? That language is a toy. You can never do anything in production with Ruby. And we also kind of have a reputation for maybe being very opinionated and very loud. And why do we have that opinion? Why do people look at us and say, oh, Ruby's like a bunch of crazy people, they get drunk, they're all programmers? And it would be because of Rails. Most people, when they hear Ruby, they immediately assume Rails. I personally, as a Ruby developer, have not done a whole lot of Rails recently. There's so many other things you can do with Ruby, and Rails is just like one extra web framework that, we don't have as many web frameworks as PHP, but it's not the only thing that you do to get your work to the web. So dispelling this, Ruby is not the same as Rails. A vast majority of people who, especially people who go to boot camps, they learn Rails and they don't know Ruby. A lot of Ruby developers don't really touch Rails anymore because it's a huge monolith, despite what you may have heard from a certain three-letter acronym on Twitter. It's huge and it's cantankerous. It's difficult to use, so why bother? The interesting thing is most people got into it because of Rails. I got into it because of Rails. I was working at a place that was using a Microsoft technology called Visual Fox Pro. How many of you have heard of Visual Fox Pro? That guy, and that's it. It's okay. Don't feel bad if you've never heard of it. I hope you've never heard of it. And God, please, I hope you've never touched it before because it's the worst. But Microsoft end-of-lifed it. They were like, we're not doing this anymore. So my boss was like, shit, what are we going to do? What is similar to Visual Fox Pro? Postgres kind of has similar functionality. What works well with Postgres? Ruby on Rails. He's like, great, go learn it in a weekend. I'm like, what? No. But we were using it, and we started to do it. And the one thing everyone was saying at the time was like, oh, with Ruby and Rails, you can get 90% of the work done in 10% of the time. Sure, that other 10% is kind of tough, though. But our big boss, the founder of the company, was like, you guys are like magicians. Like, Ruby's not that difficult. Ruby, you never do hard work with Ruby. He kind of had this idea that, like, and I'll let this sink in for a second. The idea that because it wasn't enterprise, it was open source software, that you could easily go out into the community and just pick something up and make your shitty little I'll find any espresso in South of Market, San Francisco, but you'll never make anything good, was kind of the attitude people had about Ruby, including the founder of that company, who little did he know all of our production applications were in Ruby by that point in time. But it's really hard work. It's not easy. Granted, we're not building airplanes, but we do kind of build a bunch of stuff. All of these companies, if they're not currently using Ruby, they have some Ruby on the back end. They started with Ruby, and these are all kind of big deals. Like, these are not small companies. Bluebox, who, I used to work for Bluebox before I got traded to Bluemix. IBM's a very complicated company. They started doing strictly, Ruby and Rails stuff. Twitter was built on Ruby. Hulu on Rails. Like, these are a lot of companies that use the Ruby ecosystem, and they're not small. So obviously, this is not a toy language. So let's look at the big enemy of Ruby, enemy perceived, PHP. How many of you have worked in or currently work in PHP? A fair amount. For a long time, PHP was like the gateway language to doing web development. The first thing I want to is kind of dispel this rumor. There's no animosity between the PHP and Ruby community. We do two things that are very similar in slightly different ways. But that doesn't mean we hate each other. That doesn't mean, like, I go to PHP meetup groups and say, Symfony's just like Rails, because that's just mean. I don't do things like that. Like, it's just people coding in slightly different ways, in the same way that, like, I don't speak Swedish, but we kind of get along and understand what I'm saying right now in English. They're just languages. But for a while, everyone said, oh, PHP is dead. It's kind of interesting that people would say PHP is dead. This is one of the biggest myths that I uncovered when I was researching this talk. Like, there's a lot of people that think, oh, PHP is going to go away soon. There's even been recent talk like, oh, WordPress is moving things off of PHP. They're going to Node, so obviously PHP will just die a slow and painful death after that. PHP is the world's most widely spread web development language. Something like 80% of the internet is running PHP code. So if 80%, that's mind-blowingly large percentage. So if that's true, then how is it dead? Like, something that's running 80% of anything isn't going to go away anytime soon, clearly. So why would people get this perception? People think that PHP is an object-oriented language. It's also not a functional language or a scripted language. It's, it's PHP. It's just a little website. I mean, it did originally mean personal homepages. Sure, but things have come a long way. If you were using PHP, if you've touched PHP, but you haven't touched it like since before version 4, it was an object-oriented language, but that's a long time ago. They're now on PHP 7. I will let Davey in the back of the room answer any questions you want about PHP 6 and why there isn't one. That's a whole other issue. What else? PHP is slow. This is coming from a Ruby guy. PHP is slow. Ruby's super slow. Thing is, we, as developers, talk about things in milliseconds, and we think milliseconds are slow. Most end users don't see that and really don't care as long as their page loads. It doesn't have a built-in compiler. It's an interpreted language. So yeah, there's other things. Go is faster. I will grant you that. But when we're talking milliseconds, tiny little milliseconds, does it really matter as long as the end user is getting what they need to see? Same is true of other languages. Perl is slow, and it has a built-in runtime compiling system, so you can compile bytecode without having to do anything. PHP functions in exactly the same way. I mean, when we think slow, when developers say slow, we're not really taking into account the user's experience at the end of the line. So we should stop thinking like, oh, this loaded in 0.0532 milliseconds. That's too slow. It's fast enough for the person who's actually using your product. Security. For a long time, PHP had this image of it's insecure. But again, this goes back to 80% of the internet. It's kind of like when Microsoft was the dominant OS. People were like, oh, if you use Microsoft, you're totally going to get a virus. Yes. because it was about 75% of the market at the time. And so viruses were written for Microsoft OS for Windows because that was who you wanted to take down. And it just so happened that as OS X started to be build up and be a larger part of our community, people, security was also a bigger thing then, so they could kind of mitigate that. And Windows had this kind of shitty name that was, insecure. When it comes to building applications, there's no language that's 100% secure. Your app is exactly as secure as you build it. It doesn't matter the language, there's going to be some patch or some vulnerability that's going to come up, and you're going to have to fix it. And if you don't, you're going to be liable. So saying PHP is insecure is saying programming is insecure. Any program is insecure. Any application is insecure. It's up to you to make it secure. So what about Java? Java is another dead language. Like, who uses this? Who's ever programmed in Java? I'm so sorry for all of you. It's pretty terrible. And I say that just because it's old and it moved a little bit slowly. It didn't evolve as fast as these more up-to-date open source languages. But it powers some of the biggest apps available today. You remember the image that I had of the guy on the plane who was like, the guy was like, I built a Ruby app that tells me where all the coffee places are. And the other guy's like, I built the stuff that runs this plane. That guy probably coded in Java. In all reality, it runs planes, it runs big business, it runs banks. You start looking for a job in any kind of financial sector, and they're going to say, do you know Java? Do you know J2E? You're going to have to know these things. Everywhere around the world, Java is huge. So why do we think it's dead? Kind of ridiculous. Have any of us ever coded to build a space shuttle? Probably not. That's mostly Java code. Python. Has anybody here coded in Python? Have you guys heard of this? It's like a new thing. I don't know if you see it. I think it just came out a couple days ago. I'm not really sure. But in all seriousness, like, Python was built for academics. It was like an object-oriented language for all these people who are like, I love Scala and I love Haskell, but I can't do anything with them, so I want to start doing work with Python and SciPy and PyMath and all this other stuff. It's like, what? Okay, but yeah, it's great for that, don't get me wrong. But saying like you can only do scientific and academic stuff with Python, it's ridiculous. But this is the image people outside of the Python community have. They're like, that's some serious shit. I'm not going to mess with that. That's for like, back-end stuff. I'll never build a web app with Python. I used to work at a company that was mostly, it was mostly Ruby on Rails, a PHP company. But we wanted to give back. We were the community team. We wanted to give back. So we organized a little bit of money, and a friend of mine wrote an application that in Python that allowed us to give back to organizations and people that would love through a program called GitTip. I know it has a different name now, but it was called GitTip at the time. It's not so great anymore, but it was pretty cool. And we were able to do that and kind of dole out the money on a weekly basis. And that was all written in Python. None of that is science. None of that is academic. None of that is mathematics. Well, there's a little bit of mathematics, but that's fun, and that's what Python can be. Last week I was at RailsConf, and this guy, Paul Lemire, some of you might know him, he works at Spotify. It's a terrible picture. I'm sorry, my seats were shit, but that's the best I could do. And he talked all about coding Python for fun. And this guy's talking about coding Python at a Rails conference. That's pretty ballsy. And yes, he made a couple jokes about how this isn't Rails, so we didn't understand it. And he had brackets and semicolons, and I'm like, what? But in all reality, like, the stuff that he was doing was kind of amazing. He was using Python to query the Spotify database to get information. And with it, he built an app called Boil the Frog. Has anybody heard of Boil the Frog? Probably not. It's a fairly new thing. So what Boil the Frog does is it goes to Spotify, and it says, okay, so you have a Katy Perry fan. Everyone knows who Katy Perry is? Sorry about that. She's American. Not my fault. And Dimmu Borgir, who is a Norwegian black death metal band. And how could you in 10 songs get from Katy Perry, pop princess, to this black metal band? And he wrote an entire thing to figure passion and overlay and all the different details. And it was great. He wrote it in Python. That's not really science. That's just fun. And it was awesome. So obviously Python, not just for academics. Linux. This is the year of the Linux desktop, you guys. This is happening right now across the world. It's not a language. But people have this perception that if you work with Linux, like, you are some like basement-dwelling neckbeard who has 37 cats and your whole thing is to just build enough packages that maybe someone will donate you some money through like something like GitTip so that you can totally feed your cats and not live with your parents for the rest of your life. This is what Linux is to the outside world. And that's why we're all hip and we use Mac OS X now. But it's just a stereotype. And that's really what this whole talk is about, is bad stereotypes and why do we have them and we shouldn't. Linux is great for Bitcoin mining and stuff like that. I don't know, that's kind of weird, but I don't know why I picked that as an example. But like people do great things with Linux. I mean, Rain just gave a great talk about all this stuff that you could build with Red Hat, and it's like, that's really cool. It's not just like people sitting in basements living with their parents, which is funny because my office is in a basement, so this is a lot funnier to me. Perl. So I wrote this blog article a little while back when I worked at another company called Is Ruby Dead? And the people at Aristotle wrote an article called Is Perl Dead or just Deader Than Ruby? And I was like, what does that even mean? Like did you read my article? Because it was about how Ruby isn't dead. It's just achieved maturity. Excuse me. And this is before the latest version of Perl came out on Christmas, but it was amazing to me. It's like Perl, that was the gateway for so many of us to start programming. It was open source. It was available. Was it tough? Yes, it was very tough. But people are still, this runs so many websites that, I mean, yes, does it compete with PHP? Not really, but it runs Craigslist, which in the US is like the hugest thing ever if you want to buy like a really shitty bicycle or meet someone in a really weird situation. But I mean, it's powerful. It's really cool. So last Christmas, Perl 6 was released, kind of. And from what I've heard, like the wait was totally worth it. Like Perl 6 is absolutely amazing because they took so much time and effort to make it a much better thing than Perl 5. And I think that's really what it comes from. Swift. Swift is the future. We should all stop what we're doing and immediately learn Swift because this is what's happening in the world. And notice you can also switch, Go, Elixir, many other various languages to be the exact same. This was like a huge sentiment, so much so that I saw this tweet and I was like, what in the hell is this even trying to say? Seats reserved for the elderly, pregnant passengers, and Objective-C. So, okay, I know you're just trying to make a point, but like, so you're trying to say these people are obsolete. Objective-C developers are now obsolete. So what you're saying is the people in this represented in this picture are obsolete. The elderly are obsolete. Pregnant women, pretty much the most valuable resource to humanity is having more humanity. So pregnant women, kind of not obsolete. I'm going to say C developers are kind of important. Luckily, Swift kind of changed track, and they're like, oh, we're going to be open source, it's going to be cool, and they're still kind of working on that. It's still interesting, but they kind of had this perception of a very hipster thing. And when it comes to hipster things, of course, what comes to mind? JavaScript. And this is where we kind of change tack a little bit. Like the whole thing is, JavaScript is cool. It's very powerful. And you've got Node, and Node does amazing things. And you've got, Ember, and Ember is absolutely fantastic for front-end development. And you've got Angular, and it's totally available. But then you've got shit like this. Like, most of these things you probably couldn't just off the top of your head tell me what the hell they do. Because they don't make sense. There was just this big glut of, I've built a new JavaScript language. I've built a new framework. I've done this. This is the new hotness. I don't know if you guys saw the advertisement, left pad, for all your left padding needs. Make sure you check that out. But this is kind of how it goes. Fast growth, huge early adoption, not a whole lot of necessity, and all of these things that are on this slide have slowly gone away, except for Kraken.js because it's run by PayPal. Totally makes sense, right? Kraken, PayPal. Very obvious. The point I'm trying to make is there's an evolution. Things become stagnant. Sure they do. Things become mature. Things change over time. But that's good. We want things to change over time. For example, I work at IBM Bluemix. I've worked at a few other companies, and many at the start of them were, our own hardware, building our own things, and that was great. Then the cloud became a thing. Cloud was very important. So they became platforms as a service and said, now we can utilize the power of the cloud, which is someone else's hardware, and we can harness that and make it easy for you to deploy these things and have great stuff like high availability and redundancy. And you don't have to worry about the physical machinery. That's awesome. And then along comes Docker. Docker is now the new hotness, and you have to adjust and say containers are awesome. Let's start using containers. Things always need to change because the things that we do as developers are getting better, and we're learning from things as they come out. But again, just because something's new and hot doesn't mean that's what we have to do. So, learning. Many of us are learning through our communities. So let's talk about communities for a bit. There's so many communities out there. I mentioned I'm a Ruby developer. I mostly speak at Ruby conferences, but I've also spoken at open source PHP conferences. This is my first PyCon, and it's in Sweden, which is really cool because every time I've been to Sweden, it has had this weather. So as far as I'm concerned, this is what Sweden is like. It is always about 25 degrees, and I will be wearing shorts later today. Pretty much in about 20 minutes, I will put my shorts on and go enjoy the sunny Swedish weather, which is what you're known for. But it's really cool. I mean, there's so many tech communities. We could say, and I'm just going by color here. Here we have, the Ruby community because they're red, and here's the PHP community because they're blue, and here's Python because they're yellow. That's cool, but what do you pick up on this immediately? Not that I have a shitty color scheme and I steal pictures off the internet, and I don't credit anyone for them, but please don't complain about that. You could edit that out of the tape because I should not have said that out loud. The first thing you notice is yes, there are many communities, and while there are lines between them, they are very small lines and they are not mixing together. So we're great tech communities, but we are separate and kind of equal in weird ways, never mingling. That's the whole problem. That's how we get the perceptions that I've been talking about up to this point, is we don't talk to each other. We all live in glass houses, and at the same time, we all love to throw stones. That's the irony. It's really easy to pick on everybody when you never talk to the person that you're picking on. So what we need more of is this cross-pollination. People need to leave their comfortable zones, their niches, which is a word I can't say. You do Python. Go to the PHP meetup. See what they have to say. I do Ruby. I came to a Python conference. I'm having a great time. That's kind of what we need to do is get out of these little things. If you do live in Linux and you love Linux, go to an enterprise meetup. Go to a Windows meetup for Windows devs. See what they say. See what they're like. They might be cool. They probably don't just wear ties. Jesus, I work for IBM, and I refuse to take off my hat indoors because I don't care about rules. These are things you can do. And the reason why I say this is because it's really important. These are things I've literally heard people say at meetups and conferences, and I hate every single one of them. And that's why I'm going to read them aloud. Designers aren't developers. They shouldn't be at hardcore tech meetups. Okay, so I've been coding for a pretty long time. I'm older than you might think I am. And I can make things work on the internet. I can build web applications. I can build desktop applications. I can build lots of things, and they function great. They totally work, and they look like horse shit. Because I can't, as you can tell from that other slide, I can't pick colors and stuff. My wife literally lays out my clothes for me because I can't dress properly. I don't get that kind of stuff. And there's no way I could do CSS or JavaScript or jQuery or whatever it is, any of that stuff without the help of someone else. Designers are hardcore tech people. They code just as much as we do. They just do it in a very creative way. This is actually a coworker who said this to me. Sysadmins can live without developers. What do we need them for? Okay, I can understand why you would say that. Developers and sysadmins take things from very different perspectives. But here's the thing. If you don't have developers building applications, what the fuck do you need sysadmins for? I mean, let's be honest. What are you serving on a server if there's nothing to serve? So that was a fun conversation. We're still friends. It's okay. Business folks just don't get us developers. They sure don't. Again, going back to being a developer, I love being a developer evangelist because I don't have to sell things. I can't sell things. I'm incapable of doing this. If you come up to me and you're like, I would love to use IBM Bluemix, I would be like, I will tell you about the awesome features of Bluemix. It's really amazing. How much does it cost? I don't know. Let me refer you to my business friend. Because that's it's something we don't get. And while I know sometimes it's a bummer when you're at a meetup or a conference and there's someone there who's recruiting or they want to talk to you about sales or something like that, they can kind of bring you down a little bit, but at the same time, we need them. They're part of the process. You will not get to end users if you don't have someone who understands business. Also, this is my favorite one, that's why it's last. Tech people are socially inept. All of them. Again, I'm a dev evangelist. I have a job where my job is to go and be social. A friend of mine actually he said, you shouldn't call yourself a dev evangelist. I said, why? I said, you're a professional friend. You go to conferences and you talk to everybody. He's like, it's amazing the things that you do because you spend 20 hours a day talking to people and 4 hours a day sleeping. And said, well, I have drinks in between, so it makes it okay. But yeah, like I love these community events. And yes, there's going to be some people who never come to a meetup or a conference. And those are the people that we need to reach out to because those are the people that need things like prompt because there's probably something wrong there. You need social interaction, whether it's physical or online, doesn't matter. You need to bring things together. So let's call it the tech community. Enough of being like, this is just Python, this is just Ruby, this is just Linux, this is just enterprise. Let's have a tech community because when you come together and you do things like that, it's awesome. Things will get better. So, on that note, let's talk about open source versus the enterprise. Apples and oranges, right? Never the twain shall meet. We go back to this. How people perceive open source developers. You know, they're shaggy, they live in San Francisco, they all have beards, they're all from the West Coast, and they're all making useless crap apps that nobody needs. While this is true of a certain subset of developers, and I know that, I mean, it's kind of tough to argue because this guy, you know, he's got a shirt that says Ruby, he's got a hat on, he's got a beard, and he kind of is me. I didn't even draw that, and I was like, this is the best comic. And then like the third time I gave this talk, I was like, shit, that guy actually looks like me. But I mean, it's precisely like we're scrapping together Linux packages, hoping for enough cash to get out of that basement someday, because we have no real business hopes, because we can't do that. We're open source, we like everything for free. And this is what enterprise developers are like. Ha 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 ha, business. They just waste their days sitting around trying to make money in faceless cubes and faceless companies. They're just a cog in the machine. Or they're basically waiting for that big cash prize when they become the super director or manager or VP of whatever, it's whatever company, corporation. Like, look at me, I'm at Google, blah, blah, blah. And I don't think that's true. Just like I don't think we're all shaggy and live in San Francisco. I don't live in San Francisco. I would never live in San Francisco. But, you know, like the thing is, we can learn things from each other if we just learn to get along. You know, the thing is, open source is awesome, but it has a few organizational flaws. Sometimes things get done that just don't make sense, like, you know, completely removing a package from the node system without asking anybody if they use it, just for example, to be topical. But, you know, there's things that we can learn. There's things that we can do. They understand organization. They understand, like, proper architecture of how software should work. We understand the creativity and the beauty of open source and how to do things because there's not really any rules. So that's something we can teach them. We can learn from each other. This is where the cross-pollination comes in. The whole point of this talk is to point out there's flaws in the logic, there's flaws in the way that we think about other languages that we don't use, or even languages that we've used in the past and haven't touched in years. There's flaws in the way that we look at our communities and think that we should remain in our shell and not move outside of it. There's flaws in the way that we look at enterprise as open source developers, and there's flaws in the way that enterprise developers look at us because we do open source. We need to stop this. And it starts with kind of, you know, smashing a pedestal. I love you guys. I think this is like an awesome conference. I'm having such a good time here. But let's be honest with ourselves. You're all awesome. But not one of you is a wizard, I'm pretty sure. If someone's a wizard, please stand up and do some magic, because that would be really awesome. And people would be like, PJ's was the best talk. You're probably not a ninja. If you were, I can't see you. If I get murdered right now, we know there are ninjas. And none of us is a rock star unless we're doing something like this. I was lucky enough to be a rock star for a little while when I was young. But at the same time, we can all be amazing. We can all push it to the limit. And I'm not talking about being a 10x programmer and working 80 hours a week, because fuck that. I'm talking about doing our best to keep building things, to keep making things. And yes, they're not real things, but you know, they're awesome applications and awesome programs that touch people's lives. And you know, in some cases, save people's lives. And that's what we should be doing. We should be making the world a better place. And the only way to do that is to interact with each other as much as possible in a positive way. So forget the legends, urban or otherwise. Forget the myths about what you do making you who you are. You're not just a developer. There's so much more to you than that. Help new people get in this game without, all the surrounding bullshit. Try not to teach them our own biases. Try to let them see things through new eyes and start to see things through their eyes as they come in. And pretty soon we'll be able to get rid of these urban legends. Thank you very much. So I think we have a couple minutes for questions. If anybody has questions, we do have a couple minutes. I know that was a little esoteric and not super technical, but
Thank you for your talk, PJ. Thank you.
get right up in there. You got to get right up in there.
Thank you for your talk, PJ. So I noticed that both you and Armin yesterday actually touched on how communities tend to become more androgynous amongst themselves. And I think it would be interesting if you have specific steps above and beyond going to other meetups and other conferences that people can actually do when they're at that meetup and at that other conference or online on an IRC channel to engage people that are not like yourself.
Absolutely. Thank you for your question, esteemed colleague, and I'm totally stealing that for the rest of my life. So one of the first things that I started doing was I ran the Ruby meetup in Buffalo with a friend of mine named Nick Quaranto. And we were having a few drinks. We were at a conference. We were like, what would be cool? What would be cool? If we could have like this thing where everybody gets to hack together, but it doesn't matter what language you have. So we started that. And we started it not really thinking it was going to be a big thing. We just got a fishbowl with people that had like little app ideas and whatever. Write them down, put them in the fishbowl, pick one out, and everybody just codes in the language that they're comfortable with. And what we got was a lot of this. Oh, that's how you do that. And it was neat because it was called Open Hack, and the idea was everyone could come and do what they wanted. And we got pizza or whatever and beer because that's what everyone wanted. But it was fun, and you learned a lot from all these people with their other languages. And the thing that was weird was like, this is a drunk idea we had, and we started doing, we did like 2 or 3. And then at the time I was working at a company called Engine Yard, and about 2 months later, this blog post comes out, and it's like, check out Open Hack Austin. And I'm like, wait, what? Wait, time out. Did we start an Open Hack in Austin? And Nick's like, no, neither of us live in Austin, so I don't know why that would happen. And it was written by my friend, who saw what we had done at Open Hack, and it's open, the code's on GitHub, on how to do it. And he listed the top 15 open hacks around the world. One of them was here in Stockholm. And we were like, what did we do? Because someone's going to blame us if this goes wrong. What did we do? And it was cool because all these people around the world were doing all these hacky things and making printers that printed out your Instagram pictures, which is like pretty much the most pointless thing on the earth. But it was fun. And everybody was like, oh my God, I learned so much from the guy who's doing like Windows development down the street because they actually have great interfaces with printers. And it's really great the way that they actually do that. They can pull, metadata out and start printing things. And the backend is in like Python. And it's like, what? It's crazy. So yeah, it's just about get involved, jump in IRC channels. If you have a question, ask it. If you don't know how something's implemented because you know how it's implemented in Python, you want to know how it would be implemented in PHP, tweet about it. Yes, there are going to be some people who are assholes about it. There's nothing we can do about that. But overall and in general, a large percentage of the time, you get good answers. So it's really just about reaching out and putting yourself out there. And yes, it's a very vulnerable thing to do. But you have the potential to learn a hell of a lot from it. And definitely get out and do the person-to-person thing. Like, introduce yourself. Just be like, hey, I'm a PHP developer, but I'm totally here at this Perl meetup. I think there's Perl meetups. I've never seen one, but I live in a very small place. So, but yeah, I mean, it's just about, putting yourself out there and doing it. IRC, Twitter, there's open Slack channels you can find. look at GitHub projects and see what people are doing. And then reach out to them directly. Just send them like a direct message. Be like, hey, it's really cool. I saw you did this thing and this thing, but I'm not sure how they communicate. In my language, it would go like this. How does it go in your language? And just do it. Any other questions? I know I'm like the only thing between you and lunch right now. You're the only thing between me and shorts right now. Oh.
Sorry. Yeah. Again, not a question. Sorry.
God damn it, Ruben.
Great talk, esteemed colleague. One of
That's
the
my
things,
line. That's
yeah.
my line.
Okay. Sorry. Go ahead. Say it.
Thank you for your statement, esteemed colleague.
All right. Great talk. So no, back to it's a pretty interesting subject. Is human beings us? I mean, we're all hardwired to belong to a group. We have to belong to a group. I mean, like it's just that if you go and research Maslow's pyramid, etc., if you go even modern psychiatry and psychology research, it's like we have a need to belong to a group. So we identify with a certain group, and that's totally cool. For instance, we're like, well, we get along with Pythonistas because we are a cool community. We're welcoming. We're very protective, etc. But bearing this in mind, it's okay to go out there and try different communities. I mean, like go to a Ruby meetup, even though you normally wouldn't go. I mean, make yourself be conscious of that. I mean, be conscientious, make a conscientious effort to go out there, and try new meetups that you normally wouldn't. I mean, whether it's the Java users group, which they're everywhere, by the way. I mean, they're huge, the Java users group. Go to, technologies that you would never even think about using. Well, would I go to like a Perl and open source? Normally, I wouldn't, but I would just to get my feet wet, just to see how that community works. And you'll be surprised. Like, you will meet really interesting people. I can guarantee you. Like, and obviously, as he said, there's assholes out there, and you need to deal with that as well. But mostly, I can, well, I couldn't guarantee you that, but I could tell you, like, I could tell you with confidence that most of the people will be, if not friendly, at least it will be accepting of you, and they will answer your questions when you have them. So, like, it takes a little bit of courage if you're used to the comfort of our comfortable community of Python, and we're all happy with each other and we understand each other. We're not, but that's a different point. But anyway, so like the whole point is like accept that we're humans and we like to belong to a community at least or two, but be also conscientious of that and don't get yourself enclosed in those two loops, and try to explore out there, try to say different things.
Right. And to kind of mention what Rain said before, like another thing that you can do is, chances are if you work at a bigger organization, there are other people within your office or general office sense that are doing something different than what you're doing. Go and talk to those people. I used to work with Davey. Davey, he spoke on HTTP2 yesterday in this room. And we used to work, he's a PHP guy, I'm a Ruby guy. We've learned tons from each other, like tons when we were working directly together. And like it opened my eyes to a lot of awesome things. If you're curious about like how to get involved in meetups in your area or stuff like that, send me an email, or even better, tweet me, because I only read my email occasionally. And I'm totally willing to hook you up with people that I might know in the area, or people, if you're traveling and you want to know where's the cool meetup in Dayton, Ohio. I don't know why you'd go to Dayton, Ohio. It just popped into my head. But, I know some people that are out there, and I can get you hooked up, and you can go learn new things. And that's what it's all about. That's what I want everyone. That's the takeaway. Learn new things and be cool with each other. So I think we're out of time. I think we're a minute over, actually.
That's right.
Thank you, everybody.
Yeah, thank you all. I just want to convey that we have, for the vegetarians and vegans, you can ask for another starters. You can ask the staff.